Hello and welcome to the latest episode of my YouTube channel, Kaya Kaynak 97. I am going to skip all the usual introductory spiel because there is some very good news that we have to talk about, and that is that Arsenal have agreed a fee in full for Declan Rice, £105 million, including add-ons. The structures have been agreed, and to talk about that, I am joined by a very special guest. It is none other than the Evening Standard's Malik Ouzia, who is here with us today. Malik covers West Ham sort of week in, week out, knows the club almost better than anyone that I can think of. And I thought it was the perfect man to bring on, discuss everything we've got going on. You can follow Malik on Twitter at Malik Ouzia _. That's going to be going on throughout the show. So please do give him a follow. And I guess, Malik, first question I want to ask you is, why has this taken so long? Because we've all known about it for a really, really long time. So why is it taking so long to finally get down to business?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. Why has it taken so long? I mean, I suppose the first thing is towards the back end of the season, West Ham had the very big incentive of a European final to build towards. So I suppose when some other transfers, maybe the cogs start to whir once teams' seasons are kind of petering out, and obviously Arsenal's interest has been kind of common knowledge since January time, really. But in the back end of the season, there was kind of a bit of an agreement on all sides, really, that his future wouldn't be resolved until after that final. Rice very much wanted to concentrate on that. And I think that didn't even take place until 10 days after the end of the season. And then I suppose since then, it's probably a multitude of factors, really. I mean, it has taken so long, but it's also only the 5th of July. And, if, you look at kind of signings in the past that Arsenal have made, ticking all the way down to deadline day and stuff, they've actually seems, obviously with the Timber news as well, that they're getting things done nice and early from West Ham's perspective. I suppose once they'd agreed and it became common knowledge that they were going to sell him this summer, there was no rush to kind of boot him out the door. They were happy to kind of let a little bit of a bidding war unfold, which I suppose didn't quite happen, but obviously that Man City interested seemed to force Arsenal's hand a little bit. And they're now in a position where, having let that unfold and stayed pretty strong on their stance, they've got near enough the valuation they were hoping for.
So obviously, 105 million is a lot of money. We have to point out that is, including add-ons, but 100 million guaranteed. So it could be a record fee for a British player in the Premier League. So it's certainly a record fee for Arsenal. I guess I get a lot of questions from fans, and I might answer this question as I think he is, but do you think he's worth that much money, and if so, why?
It's almost a moot point, isn't it? Is so and so worth this fee? It almost does. It doesn't matter what you or I think they're worth. If that's what the selling club wants for them, and that's the money that they're going to demand to sell them, and Arsenal are happy to pay it, then evidently, that's what the player's worth. I think quite often when we talk about valuations, we talk specifically about the ability of the player, and we compare them. And actually, obviously, the thing that influences the fee is all sorts of things like the willingness of the club to sell, the length of the contract, which is a big one in this instance. The fact that he has still got a couple of years effectively to go. As an out-and-out footballer, is he £100 million player? I don't know what is £100 million player. Can he have a bigger impact at £100 million than, say, Anthony has had at Man United for a similar fee? I think absolutely he can. Is he going to have twice the impact that Casemiro's had at Man United for £50 million? That's probably quite hard to gauge. So I don't really know in terms of that specific fee, but he's definitely worth, I suppose, the billing as one of the most expensive signings of this summer, because he's one of the best players who's on the market this summer.
Obviously, the big story for Rice, and you mentioned it there towards the end of the season, was the Conference League final. And I've got a nifty little picture of that, so I might as well use it here. That was the build-up, the culmination of his season, his time at West Ham. It almost feels like a natural ending point, if you like. You were obviously there in Prague. Just talk to me about how key he was in the run to the final and obviously winning the trophy overall, and how important he's been to West Ham this season and I guess over the past few seasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that without him, they don't win that trophy. Without him, maybe they get relegated this season. They have other good players, of course. And he actually didn't have his best ever game in the final itself. But you look through the run, particularly the quarter-final at home against Ghent, where he scored that brilliant solo goal. And I think just as a presence around the club as well as what he is as a player, keeping the ship steady, if you like, through what was a really, really turbulent season right up until probably the last 6 weeks when they had a European final to look forward to and they were safe in the Premier League. He's their best player by some distance, even with one or two like Lucas Paqueta really improving at the back end of the season. So yeah, I don't think you can overstate his influence, particularly given the fact that they lost Mark Noble this time last year to retirement, who was the other kind of massive presence around the club. Yeah, he's their best player by distance, but he'd be the best player at probably 14, 15 Premier League teams by distance as well.
My then question for you afterwards is, I mean, there's obviously stuff with Mikel Arteta that goes back a long way. Let's look at some of his strengths here, and you can see a lot of green bars. We've got stats from FBref. The ones that stand out to me the most are, and I think these are maybe things that have developed more this season. Obviously, the interceptions we've known about as a real strength in his game for a really long time, and that intensity and the ability to win the ball high up the pitch and ball recoveries in the 99th percentile. There's hardly anyone better than him in the Premier League. The one that's caught my eye is the total carrying distance and how good he's been at moving the ball up the pitch. Is that something that's happened this season, or is that just something I haven't noticed, not seeing him week in, week out?
I think it's happened more this season. I think part of his, that's definitely an area of his game that David Moyes was quite public with him about wanting to improve, about getting forward more, getting into position, scoring more goals. And actually, he's not, when he does that quite often, it's not kind of a Frank Lampard arriving late, having not been involved in the move kind of thing. He is quite often the man picking up deep. I talked about that goal against Ghent being the kind of standout example. I think part of that as well, to be honest, is probably born of a bit of frustration at how West Ham were playing for quite a lot of the season, where he was kind of really having to go and get the ball off the centre-backs and try and get them up the pitch, almost, Steven Gerrard at Liverpool kind of stuff. If no one else is going to do it, I'll be the man to. So whether that's come into it a little bit more this season. West Ham are a team that play on the counter-attack as well, which at their best anyway, which I suppose lends itself to midfielders getting the ball and carrying it rather than receiving it higher up the pitch.
That's obviously quite a different style to how Arsenal play. Arsenal want to be higher up the pitch. Rice, when he comes to Arsenal, is not maybe going to be in those deeper areas you were talking about there. He might not be carrying the ball as high up the pitch. But do you think he'll have any issues adapting to Arsenal style and adapting to playing for a bigger team? Because some players have struggled going from being sort of the best team and the guy who does it all at maybe a smaller team and moving to a bigger club.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the one question, isn't it? Because everything else, transfers are never a done thing, but everything else around this, in terms of the character that Rice is, the level that he's proven himself at in an England shirt, the kind of environment he seems like he's going into at Arsenal, everything else screams, banker. How can he not be a success there? And that is the one question. Can he go from playing in a team that didn't have much of the ball, and that's not just saying this season where West Ham were struggling, actually even when they were at their best the season before that and the one before that, they are a team that play on the counter-attack. So it will be a different style of play. I suppose you have to look at his games in an England shirt as maybe the closest that we've had to that, and it was obviously exceptional at the World Cup and at the Euros. But yeah, that's probably the one area where you ask the question. But on the evidence that we've got, you'd be encouraged to think that he definitely can. Yeah.
You mentioned there his character. You've had him in the mix zone quite a few times covering West Ham. How has he come across to you in interviews, and what's he like within the dressing room? I've seen you write about the pranks that he's done against some of his other teammates, which I've enjoyed. What do you think he'll bring to the Arsenal dressing room, and how much of a loss will he be for West Ham on that front as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone by this point, it's a little bit like your kind of Jack Grealish and James Maddison type characters, where I think people see them in post-match interviews and you can't help but like them. But certainly as a leader, if you're talking about Granit Xhaka leaving, then that's obviously going to be a bit of a gap in the Arsenal dressing room. You look back to last summer with Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko coming in, and people talked a lot about the impact that they had then, and they're probably not players that would so obviously have that kind of captain's leadership presence, whereas someone like Rice coming in very much does have that presence. So yeah, he's been a focal figure around the club at West Ham. He's obviously been there for an awful long time, so he carries kind of a certain authority there that won't come automatically overnight when he strolls into the door at Arsenal. But you look again at some kind of comparable figures have gone into other clubs in recent years, maybe going back to when Virgil van Dijk arrived at the Man City. Those kind of players, they're not necessarily going to walk in and take the armband, but they very obviously lift those around them and bring that kind of character to the dressing room.
Are there any sort of stories that stand out to you from your time covering sort of in depth at West Ham, or you think, wow, this is probably something what Arsenal need maybe in the dressing room, something they've been lacking?
Yeah, I mean, at times, to be honest, he's maybe come across a little bit of a raw leader at times this year, because he obviously took the armband from Mark Noble last summer. He'd been captain a lot before then, but he wasn't the club captain. And then maybe there were times where almost he wore his heart on his sleeve a little bit too much, and you'd maybe want a bit more of a calmer, controlling presence. So perhaps, with Martin Odegaard, that might dovetail quite nicely. But yeah, I mean, loads of stories about, he goes back all the time to the youth academy at West Ham, which isn't situated at the same training ground. It's 5-10 minutes up the road, but he's in there, and as is Mark Noble actually, and they'll be playing in the gym with the youth teams and stuff like that. And I think these things do matter, right? He seems like a nice guy and a good bloke, especially at Arsenal, where so much of the uplift of the last few years has been around the way that the fans have started to relate to their team again. He does feel like someone, although he's an outsider, will very quickly come in and slot into that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite quotes from Mikel Arteta press conference is when Mark Owen from The Sun asked him, do you have a no, how do I put this politely, a no D-heads policy? And yes, Arteta responded, well, I can't say those exact words, but yes. And that does seem sort of like Rice is going to fit right into that. But you spoke there about stuff that he'll bring that maybe isn't already there. I just want you spoke about Martin Odegaard. I want to compare him to what Arsenal have had this season and maybe what he's bringing that hasn't been there already. And when you look at these comparison stats, obviously what jumps out immediately, and we spoke about progressive carries before, but interceptions. Do you think this is something that Arsenal have been desperately lacking? Because as well as doing West Ham, you cover plenty of Arsenal as well. You watch plenty of Arsenal too. Do you think this is something that Arsenal need? And do you think it's the kind of addition to the Arsenal midfield that takes them up a level and sort of helps them compete a bit more with Manchester City?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing, the obvious thing to point out is his interception numbers are going to be a lot higher because West Ham don't have anywhere near as much of the ball as Arsenal do. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too revisionist about it, because now that he's coming in and everyone's saying, he's a huge upgrade on Thomas Partey, say at the base of midfield, I think we all know that for a lot of last season, Partey was absolutely outstanding, and it's probably only in the way that he tailed off in the last sort of few months that coincided with Arsenal's drop off. But there are areas where he's definitely an upgrade. I think he's a lot more diligent than Thomas Partey, just in terms of kind of retaining that focus and concentration. Probably the standard example of that, ironically, would be the incident at West Ham when it was Rice that robbed Partey on the edge of the box in a game that Arsenal were absolutely strolling, and that kind of changed the whole momentum. He definitely athletically, he covers more ground and those kind of things. He's probably not quite as technically good, certainly as Jorginho and probably as Partey as well. But maybe that's a side of his game where there's a bit of untapped potential still. I think durability is probably the big thing, and you have to touch wood here, because I think we've all seen these episodes before where a club signs a player who's not missed a game for 10 years or whatever, and then they come in firstly, they're out for 3 months or something. But his record is just ridiculous. I looked up just before I came on here, and last 2 seasons, I think he's missed 3 games rather, 2 of them for illness, 1 for suspension in the Premier League, so no injuries. And there's only been 2 games that he hasn't started, and they were both where they rested him before a big European game in midweek. So basically, pretty much whenever you need him, as long as he's not either picked up some cards or got a cold, you can pick him, which is an incredible thing to have when you're going into a Champions League season where, for all the talk of, you want to build squad depth in terms of numbers, actually the difference between Champions League, Premier League and Europa League, Premier League is probably that you don't actually need the numbers. You need players who can play twice a week, because you don't want to make 11 changes to your team in midweek in the Champions League in the way that you would in lesser competition. So hopefully Arsenal are buying a player there who can turn out a lot more regularly than either Partey, who's obviously had those injury problems, or Jorginho, I suppose, is getting on in age a little bit and isn't quite as mobile.
And Champions League is obviously a new thing for Arsenal this season. There's going to be a lot more big occasions at the Emirates. We spoke already about the Conference League final, but you spoke also about how arguably West Ham may not have survived in the Premier League without Rice this season. And rising to those big occasions is a theme that I think is certainly a positive for him. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's what he does? Do you think when he sees these big occasions, do you think he doesn't strike me as someone who sort of wilts away? He seems to get even better, especially towards the end of the season. He was on another level this year for West Ham.
Yeah, and I think it's what I was saying before about it being almost a bit of a no-brainer transfer. Actually, quite often that is the big question mark if you're buying a player from a team further down in the Premier League. But the way that I suppose the planets have aligned over the last few years is we've actually seen him in massive European competitions for 2 seasons. We've seen him go deep in 2 major tournaments with England, and we've seen him then having to dig in a relegation scrap. And so for a player who's spent all of his career so far at a club that hadn't been used to competing for silverware or anything like that over the last however many years, we actually have seen a lot of him in those big game scenarios. He's tended to raise his game in whether it's in those competitions or just when playing against the best sides in the Premier League. That Arsenal game at the London Stadium being a big example. He was brilliant against Liverpool and Man United at the back end of the season as well. Going against Chelsea, I think he had a really good game if I remember rightly. So yeah, I think we've seen as much as you can see of someone before they start getting into those environments. And it's worth saying, without Champions League football this season, Arsenal just don't get him, right? It's a kind of the big thing that he made kind of a song and dance of when he first talked about wanting to move on, and his ambitions when he was away on England duty was that he wanted to play Champions League football. If you're kind of being cynical, you maybe look at the top 4 this season, the fact that Newcastle are in it, and you think, if it was a more kind of traditional looking top 4, maybe there would have been a bit more rivalry from, say, a Chelsea for his signature. But the fact they can't offer that next year, and he's on record as saying that's a big part of his motivation to go, has probably helped Arsenal's cause as well.
So we've been talking lots about positives and lots of good stuff, but no player is perfect, and Declan Rice would admit that he's got areas of his game that he needs to improve. From looking at these stats here, obviously the one that stands out is the goals and assist column. Even not comparing him to Martin Odegaard, who had a sensational, the best sort of end product season of any player in the Premier League last season, but maybe Xhaka is a fairer comparison, where Xhaka got 14 goals and assists, Rice got 6. He said to you in the past, hasn't he, that he wants to add more goals to his game. Is that something that you notice him getting better at? He obviously scored a few more towards the end of the season, or do you think that maybe being at Arsenal, that might even sort of, there's so many other things to adapt to that maybe that will have to take a back seat for now?
Yeah, I think his position will be interesting on that. I mean, you're right in saying that it's something that he's talked about and Moyes has talked about, there being untapped potential there with regards to the goals he can get. And, technically you can see he's a really good, strikes the ball really well. He's scored a couple of good long range goals. It's probably more a case of the positions that he gets into, the kind of positions that Granit Xhaka was picking up last season, kind of intelligent ones in behind off that kind of left 8 position are alien to Rice. That's not what he does. When he does get into goal scoring positions, it tends to be kind of on the edge of the box, ball laid back, have a crack kind of thing. But if we're assuming that at Arsenal he's going to play as the holding player with maybe Kai Havertz and Odegaard either side, you'd expect that to probably curtail him a little bit in terms of going forward. And I actually think that's when kind of defensively he looks at his best, when he's the sole pivot, similar to what he was at the World Cup for England, because it almost kind of focuses the mind that, right, this is my job. And he kind of has that. Sometimes when he plays in a 2, he kind of thinks, right, I've got more license. There's more on me to go forward and try and create and try and score. And maybe you're vulnerable to leaving the back door open a little bit there, particularly if you're in a midfield with say, Havertz and Odegaard, who aren't as defensively switched on. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are more goals in him. The assist column, I'd be surprised if he was kind of became a creative player. You might pick up the odd assist technically where, you're the bloke who passed it to someone, lays it off or whatever. But I don't think we're going to be seeing him kind of carving defences apart. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong.
I mean, that you touched on it there, and the kind of the thing I wanted to bring up next was the position he's going to play. And I've got some heat maps here of those areas that he does pick up the ball with West Ham, and they are very deep, like you've been referencing before. And obviously, game state is a big part of that, and where West Ham play generally on the pitch is a big part of it. But what interested me is that he tends to drift to the left. I know he plays in a double pivot with Souček, so Souček tends to be a bit more on the right. But I guess at Arsenal, the way Partey plays is shifting slightly more to the right. And I wonder, so we're assuming that he'll be a 6, or do you think there's a chance he'll be an 8? And if he does play in the 6, sort of what do you think he'll have some adapting to do when it comes to Arsenal, going from, like you said before, I know you said that being a lone 6 is something that can maybe focus in, but do you think there'll be maybe a transition period that comes from double pivot at West Ham to single pivot at Arsenal?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing is back end of the season with West Ham, they experimented quite a lot, and the bulk of his last 3 seasons he has played in a 2 with Souček, but actually towards the end of the year they kind of fell upon a 4-3-3 where he was at the middle and Souček and Paqueta either side, which obviously is more similar to what we're expecting him to do at Arsenal. But no doubt there'll be a period of adaptation, partly because I suppose in Souček alongside him, he's had another player who's, I suppose, puts in, ridiculous amount of work rate, has the same physical presence, and maybe he won't be getting that from the rest of the midfield at Arsenal. So defensively, there might be even more responsibility on him. And yeah, if he does come to play, I mean, that's you got on the graph there where he picks up those pockets on the left. He doesn't jump out at you as good technically as, say, Odegaard, who plays in the same place on the right. But then we would have said the same thing this time last year about Xhaka, or maybe 18 months ago. I think we'd have experimented with him a little bit by then, hadn't we? But he didn't strike you as the kind of player who was going to be brilliant at getting it in those tight advanced spaces. I don't think Rice will. I think he will be better in a 6. But I'm just saying that Mikel Arteta's kind of shown that he can mould a player who you would maybe think, in Xhaka's case, had come to the end of his development. If anything, should be starting to go the other way. Rice is 24, and you'd hope that at that age he might not get loads better technically or physically, but there are kind of intelligent, positional, tactical things that you'd hope working under Arteta would be able to develop his game as well.
I also want to point out this picture I've got on the right of all the passing that he's done. I think this is from the game against Leicester where he scored. West Ham won. It was kind of the game that kept them up, if I'm not mistaken. Officially sort of confirmed their stake in the league, right?
The Leicester game, I'm trying to think. Away from home?
It might have been away from home. The point is there is a lot of long switches, which is what I'm wanting to focus on. That is certainly a tool that he's got in his box. It's probably one of his favourite tools. How good is he at those, and what do you think that can bring to Arsenal? Because obviously at West Ham, they've got very impressive wide players. Arsenal have very impressive wide players too, and they want to get the ball forward to them quickly. How important do you think that could be as an asset for Arsenal this season?
Yeah, I mean, you're picturing the move that we all know of. Odegaard makes the run inside and takes the man in the right, which goes out to Saka, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, he's got that pass in his locker. Strange, West Ham at times, I'm not sure it was the wisest pass, because the West Ham fullbacks are, with all due respect, probably sort of their weakest link last season. So quite often when he's playing those balls out to Vladimir Soufal, say actually not great deals coming from the attacks. But his long passing's great. I'm quite conscious here that I'm sounding like I can't find a flaw with him, and I'm sure we'll see them kind of emerge as the season goes on. But yeah, definitely that ball out to Saka in particular, I'm sure will be one that we'll see a lot of next season.
There's no worries not finding flaws. I think people on this who are watching this are very much excited. They've come here to become
yeah, I don't want to.
They're not here to hear negativity. They're here for positive. My final Rice-related question to you then, and you said you're not trying to find flaws, you're not trying to overhype it, but obviously the gap that Arsenal are looking to close is that gap to Manchester City. It was close last season. I think back to that game at the Etihad, and it was pretty brutal in the sense that Arsenal just got bullied in the midfield. Those kind of games, and you mentioned how he stands up in the big occasions across the course of a season, his consistency, his availability, all the positive things we've highlighted throughout the course of this video. Is he someone who can close the gap for Arsenal? Is he a missing piece as they look to challenge for the Premier League title this season or next season?
I mean, it's tough because you can't argue that he wouldn't close the gap in the sense that he's an upgrade on what Arsenal have, and therefore they should get closer to Man City. I suppose the caveat to that is that if Man City play for the whole of next season as they did for the last sort of 6 months of this one, then the gap's going to be bigger than it was this year, isn't it? So think asking one player, I know he's not the only player already that they've brought in, but asking one player to come in and make that difference is tough. And we've mentioned the big games that have gone well for him. He's lost some big games as well. He was in the team that lost the World Cup quarter-final to France, the Euros final against Italy in particular, where the problem was that England's midfield got overrun late in the game. The West Ham semi-final last year against Frankfurt, he wasn't able to kind of stem the tide in that game either. So, he's got to be part of a bigger collective. You'd hope that within a young team for Arsenal, there's kind of enough improvement elsewhere that if City go up a gear, Arsenal can also go up a gear, and then Rice is kind of, along with Havertz and along with Timber, coming in to add to that again and close the gap that way. But if you're looking around the league at the one player you'd probably swap him for, probably be Rodri, and that's the guy who plays for Man City. So you're having to do this, go out and spend 100 million quid just to get the player who's probably on a comparable level with him, or if anything slightly below, still unproven.
I mean, it's unbelievable standards that City set. It's ridiculous. You don't just cover West Ham, as I've said. You cover Arsenal a lot, and I want to ask you a bit more about what else is going on in the club. Obviously, Kai Havertz has come in and will potentially be a midfield partner for Declan Rice. Thoughts on that transfer? It seems a bit of a weird one from the outset, in the sense that where is he going to play? What did Arsenal necessarily need a player like him for so much money? But the more you think about it, at least the more I think about it, the more it kind of makes sense. I don't know. Where are you on it?
Yeah, I mean, the sentence that you started with there, Kai Havertz and Declan Rice are going to be midfield partners at Arsenal. If you said that 12 months ago, there's so many different dots that would kind of have to be joined to get to that point. I mean, being perfectly honest, I was very surprised by it as well. I think partly because of the money involved and the knowledge that Arsenal were pushing hard for Rice, and we weren't sure really were they going to have that much money to spend to be pumping it into those areas as well. I see the case that's been made. Kind of, this is always the way things work, right? People are surprised by a transfer, and then especially when it's a drawn out process, you kind of have to kind of talk yourself around to it. If Arsenal were signing him straight out of Germany, from Leverkusen, I think everyone would be very excited. As it is, we've seen him underwhelm now for a couple of seasons, the most part of at Chelsea. So you're probably banking on Mikel Arteta basically recapturing the player that people thought he was going to become when he was at Leverkusen. Still, there's some rationale there in terms of the fact that Chelsea's a bit of a madhouse, and you couldn't really blame anyone for going in there and not immediately being able to produce your best. And there are a decent number of case studies, I suppose, of Mikel Arteta now having made these signings. You look at Ben White, for instance, when he came in, I think a lot of people said, it's quite a lot of money, and is that really what Arsenal need? And he's turned him into a great player. So I think what Arteta and the recruitment team have done in the last couple of years, you almost earn one like this. You earn the trust of the fans to be able to say, it's not the name or the fee that I would have been shouting at the start of the window, but they've proved us wrong before. Aaron Ramsdale, another one, I suppose. So yeah, if they go and get it right, and if they can unlock that player again, then I don't think anyone will be too disappointed.
I guess from one where we're all having a few question marks, one that everyone seems to be pretty dead set on is a very good addition is Jurrien Timber, and obviously that news has come out earlier today as we're recording it on Wednesday, that Arsenal have agreed the fee with Ajax for him, around 40 million euros. I think this is a really good signing. I think it strengthens a bit of the pitch where Arsenal struggled towards the end of last season. Thoughts on him? How excited are you to see him in an Arsenal shirt next season?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose compared to the other two, he's not a player I've seen anywhere near as much. I'm obviously not playing in the Premier League, never seen him play in the flesh or anything, but maybe I have at the World Cup, can't remember. Obviously didn't leave that much of an impression at the time if he did, but yeah, just purely in terms of the area of the pitch and the number of positions, I think you're right. That's obviously an area where Arsenal got whacked at the end of last season with the double injury with Tomiyasu and Saliba. So having that versatility, I know I've seen people kind of pushing the theory that maybe you end up playing him a bit more and Zinchenko gets a rest and Tierney gets more games and all these pieces, and this kind of 4D chess stuff. It reminds me a little bit of this time last summer. We were all saying that Zinchenko could play that Xhaka role, and apparently he still can, but we're still yet to see it. So Yeah, it sounds like a sensible signing in terms of the positions and the need, the gaps in the squad. In terms of the player himself, I've not seen enough of him really to be able to talk in comparison. Is he going to push Ben White, for instance, for that shirt on a regular basis? I couldn't really tell you.
Fair enough. Well, Malik, you've given us half an hour of your time. Thank you so much. For all cricket fans out there, Malik is up in Leeds right now covering the Ashes as well. So if you want your coverage of the Ashes, the best place to go is Malik's Twitter feed and the Evening Standard as well. Is there anything else you want to plug, Malik? Anything else you want to give a shout out to?
No, I have absolutely nothing to plug other than say thanks for having me on. It's been nice to talk about something other than controversial run-outs and Lords members getting a bit angry for the last half hour. So no, cheers for having me on.
I know. Who'd have thought cricket would be more rowdy fans than football? Who'd have thought that?
I know. It's going to be a proper away atmosphere for Australia to walk into up here tomorrow, hopefully. But yeah, it should be good.
Well, make sure everyone you are following Malik on Twitter, as you can see at the bottom there, at Malik Ouzia. He's also at Malik Ouzia _. He's going to be doing some Arsenal stuff as well going forward into next season as well and over the summer. So do keep an eye on his feeds. Thank you very much for joining, Malik, and thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown of Declan Rice. As usual, please do keep liking these videos and subscribing to the channel. It really helps. And keep leaving your comments, any questions you want answered on the channel, anything you think we should be doing that we're not doing. Please do let me know. Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. Cheers and bye-bye.